Sherrone Moore is out at Michigan, and the ripple effect is absolutely touching LSU. We've got what you need to know locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked On LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. And thank you for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. By now, you probably know that Sherrone Moore is out as the Michigan head football coach. He has been fired for cause. And as we record this and details continue to emerge, I'm going to be very careful so as not to be irresponsible with what we discuss here. I don't want to rumor monger. I don't want to spread misinformation. So I'm going to stick to what we know as of right now. And the point of this is not necessarily to talk about Michigan or necessarily Sherrone Moore. It's to talk about how the ripple effects of Sherrone Moore being out at Michigan will affect LSU, because the waves here are going to touch LSU both in coaching circles, directly or indirectly, and potentially on the field as well. So I want to dive into all of that. So buckle up as we make our way through this episode and how this massive story impacts all of us here. So let me start with what we know. And what we know is that Sherrone Moore, after his second season as the head coach at the University of Michigan, has been fired for cause. So Moore had an inappropriate relationship with a staffer. There are more rumors out there that I do not want to go into. All that the Michigan statement reads is that following a university investigation, credible evidence was found that Coach Moore engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a staff member. The conduct constitutes a clear violation of university policy, and UM maintains zero tolerance for such behavior. So Sherrone Moore is 39 years old. He's been the head coach now for 2 years after Jim Harbaugh left for the NFL. So there is obviously who replaces Sherrone Moore that could impact LSU. And then the roster, notably quarterback Bryce Underwood, who we know was a longtime LSU commitment, who could very well find himself back in the market, which I want to talk about the possibilities there in just a little bit. But let's start with Moore and who replaces him, okay? And there's a couple of different angles here that could necessarily affect LSU. You can roll your eyes at this, and I know as LSU was looking for its head coach, we went through all of the different odds for the possibilities of who could replace Brian Kelly, and they varied. Throughout that whole process, we saw Nick Saban as the betting favorite. We saw Joe Brady at one point as the betting favorite. We saw Kenny Dillingham at one point as the betting favorite. But by the end, it was Lane Kiffin. And for those final, week 10 days or so, Lane Kiffin was the betting favorite, and the odds kept getting shorter and shorter as it became clearer and clearer that he was going to be the LSU coach, despite what a lot of people at Ole Miss or at Florida wanted you to believe. We told you here all along, and we nailed that story. Well, if you look at it right now, the betting favorite to be the Michigan head coach is Kalen DeBoer at 4-1 odds. Now, this is interesting for me because as we record this episode where Sherrone Moore, on the day that Sherrone Moore is ousted, this is a Wednesday. And on Saturday, this previous Saturday, so 4 days ago, I got a phone call from someone who I would say is pretty reliable. But I got a phone call from this person who told me, hey, I'm just giving you this heads up. Sherrone Moore is going to be fired at Michigan for cause for the inappropriate relationship. Actually gave me more details than have come to light yet, as we say, may, but I'm not going to rumor monger here. I'm not going to spread misinformation that I don't know is factual. But since Sherrone Moore is going to be out, they're going to fire Sherrone Moore for cause because of an inappropriate relationship. And their top target is Kalen DeBoer. Now, I rolled my eyes at it. And I sort of head patted this person and placated them when they told me this, thinking, listen, I just went through 6 weeks of the LSU coaching search saga where I was literally at one point, as people were tracking flights from Baton Rouge to Oxford, come to find out that someone was just going to pick up a dog. I was literally tweeting about a dog being picked up at the Oxford airport, like a hunting dog. So like my plane tracking days are over. I'm not interested in Michigan potential scandals. I was just not interested at all in hearing this and following and chasing leads for a program I don't cover. So on Wednesday, while I was live on my radio show and my producer whispers into my IFB, it's the internal feedback, basically in my ear, so only I heard it. Said Sherrone Moore's been fired. And I just froze. And I remembered the conversation that I had on Saturday. And sure enough, as we've seen the story, it was accurate. And the most improbable part of the story was not the DeBoer part, it's the Moore being fired part. Well, that happened. And the guy that told me this nailed it. And so I'm immediately he told me DeBoer was going to be their top target. So what might that look like? Like, could Kalen DeBoer actually leave Alabama for the University of Michigan? And again, I don't cover Michigan. I know people who went to Michigan, played at Michigan, some media there, but like, I don't have deep-rooted sources within the Michigan athletic department to be able to make phone calls to tell you that I have really good information. I don't. I'm telling you candidly. But someone I trust told me on Saturday, and has nailed the story to this point, that DeBoer would be the top target. And then the betting odds come out, and DeBoer is the betting favorite to be the head coach at Michigan. You better believe I'm going to pay attention, because even though LSU and Alabama isn't going to happen every year anymore with the new schedule, the 9-game schedule, LSU Alabama isn't one of the 3 annual rivalries. You're going to play every other year. And what happens at Alabama in the SEC is always going to be relevant to LSU, because even if you're not playing Alabama every year under the current format, you could face them in the SEC championship game. You could face them in the college football playoff. You're going to battle them for recruits and all different types of things that are relevant. And then I know this is a sort of connect the dots as it goes down the street, but if Kalen DeBoer were to leave Alabama, and again, I don't know that he would, there's a lot of people out there suggesting that Lane Kiffin would be the target. So is that even plausible? Now that we've laid the groundwork of Sherrone Moore out and Kalen DeBoer possibly is their number 1 target, I want to talk about what that would look like, the Lane Kiffin component of this. Lane Kiffin actually tweeted about this on Wednesday night, so we'll share that with you. And then Brian Kelly actually factors into this conversation as well. So I'll explain that as we continue. Don't you go anywhere. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. The holidays are officially here, which means gift hunting season is on. And if you want something meaningful, personal, and guaranteed to get a reaction, Aura Frames is the gift that delivers every time. It's not just something you wrap. It's a way to share memories, because Aura isn't your average picture frame. You can preload the frame with photos before gifting it, so when they plug it in, the memories are already there. There's no apps to figure out, no setup headaches, just instant smiles. Think about it. Grandparents, parents, newlyweds, basically anyone who loves photos, like my wife. We have one of these Aura frames actually in our den. It's endless uploads of pictures and 30-second videos throughout the Aura app. And for a limited time, you can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames, named number 1 by Wirecutter, by the way, when you use the promo code COLLEGE at checkout. So that's AURA frames.com, code college. This deal is exclusive to listeners, and frames sell out fast. So order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. And support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. want to dive into the rest of the Michigan coaching search, but I want to thank you again for making Locked On LSU your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now take it up a level and go ad free. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On LSU with no interruptions, members only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. You can go to the link in the show notes to learn more. So I candidly do not know if Kalen DeBoer would have any interest in the Michigan job. I can read the tea leaves like a lot of you do. It's impossible to follow Nick Saban. He's the greatest coach of all time. DeBoer ultimately ended up playing not well over the final month of the season. And we see how it kind of has gone now as Alabama had an embarrassing performance in the SEC championship game. They're held to -3 rushing yards against Georgia. They make the college football playoff amid controversy. If they lose to Oklahoma next Friday, you could see a world where maybe Kalen DeBoer gets on a plane and goes and checks out Michigan. So let's operate under the hypothetical that Kalen DeBoer would take the Michigan job again. I don't know if he would, but let's operate under the hypothetical that he would. Just to be clear, Michigan, money would not be an option whatsoever. If you look at the Michigan endowment, by the way, Michigan's endowment is one of the largest in the world. Michigan's endowment is $21.2 billion. $21.2 billion. That puts them behind, if you look at the list, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, MIT, Penn, Notre Dame, Columbia, Northwestern, Johns Hopkins, Washington University, and St. Louis, Duke, Emory, Cornell, Vanderbilt, University of Chicago, Dartmouth. Actually, we're not even there. We're way past. So it would actually put, forgive me, I'm looking at the wrong list. Michigan's endowment would put them 8th behind Penn and ahead of Notre Dame. Okay. So the point is, money ain't going to be an option, right? We saw this a couple of years ago with or last year with Bryce Underwood, where Larry Ellison, the head of Oracle, dropped $12 million in Bryce Underwood's lap. More on that in a second. To get him to flip from LSU. Okay. So money wouldn't be an option to pay a buyout or pay Kalen DeBoer, whatever he had to go. And Kalen DeBoer has coached in the state of Michigan before. So being a guy that really is a career Midwesterner as well, it would make more sense for him to be there. He's from South Dakota, but when you look at where he's coached throughout his career, from Sioux Falls to Southern Illinois, he was at Eastern Michigan from 2014 to 2016 before going to Fresno State, Indiana, back to Fresno, then Washington and Alabama. So all that to say, the guy's a career really Midwesterners from South Dakota. It would make more sense for him to be in Michigan than it would in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Anyway, the question of then, would Lane Kiffin leave LSU to go to Alabama? Just as we connect some dots for you here. Number one, Alabama could have hired Lane Kiffin before the 2024 season when Nick Saban retired. They could have hired him then. They did not interview him for the job. Clearly, that tells you something there at Alabama is amiss when they could have replaced Nick Saban with Lane Kiffin and didn't replace him with a Saban assistant. Instead, went and hired Kalen DeBoer. So maybe we can say, look, 2 more years removed, 2 more good seasons by Lane Kiffin, a playoff team at Ole Miss. He's more attractive, maybe. But I would venture a guess that there's probably some misgivings there at Alabama where there's people within that athletic department who wouldn't want Lane Kiffin to be the coach for whatever reason. It's worth mentioning that on the way out at Alabama, Nick Saban dismissed him before the national championship game because he wasn't focused and ultimately left for FAU and didn't coach the championship game. Remember, they promoted Steve Sarkisian from analyst to offensive coordinator for that championship game. It's also worth noting, not that this would matter a ton, but Lane Kiffin, per the terms of his contract, if he were to leave after the first year, I guess at this point, he would owe LSU $7 million. That would be his buyout after the first year. So the contract that he's already signed with LSU, if he were to leave Alabama, or Kiffin would have to reimburse LSU $7 million just to get him out of this contract to go somewhere else. Again, I don't think that would be a deal breaker if that's the coach that you wanted, but it is a financial component herein. Now, it's hard for me to imagine, as we've talked about, Kiffin and the 5 assistants that went back to Ole Miss to coach them through the college football playoff have all signed binding MOUs. It's a memorandum of understanding. I've explained this in a previous episode. Shout out to the everydayers who heard it and remember it. But an MOU isn't typically binding, but as I understand, I'm not an attorney, but as I look this up and have some conversations, you can put legally binding language in an MOU, which apparently LSU did here with non-competes with these coaches. So these are binding contracts for the assistants and for Lane Kiffin already at LSU. So I don't see a reality where Lane Kiffin would leave. I guess it wouldn't be totally unprecedented. We've seen that before where coaches have taken a job and before they coach there, they leave. I mean, this happened with Manny Diaz a few years ago where, Manny Diaz had accepted the Boston College job. I think it was Boston College, and then left before ever coaching at Boston College to go be the coach at Miami. So, I guess there is some precedent for that for someone who has accepted it, would accept the job and then leave before they ever coached in that job. But I don't think that's likely here with Kiffin at this point. The other component is Brian Kelly. So I mentioned those betting odds to you about where Kalen DeBoer is the betting favorite to be the next Michigan head coach. Well, as you go down the list of Kalen DeBoer, Jesse Minter, who's the current defensive coordinator there at Michigan, Joe Brady, Jed Fish, Jeff Brom, Kenny Dillingham, Lincoln Riley, Brian Dable, a lot of the names that you'd expect. Well, down the list a little bit is Brian Kelly at 25-1. And you can roll your eyes and laugh. And maybe I wouldn't blame you, but I would also suggest that whenever we talk about coaching searches, let me remind you, consider everything, believe nothing. And what I do know is that Brian Kelly's agent, Trace Armstrong, is very aggressive. And Brian Kelly, with a ton of history in that part of the country, having spent time at Central Michigan and, of course, at Grand Valley State in the state of Michigan, he has always revered. I know this from 4 years of covering Brian Kelly. He reveres the winged helmet. He reveres the University of Michigan, the winningest program in the history of college football. That is a job Brian Kelly would, I believe, absolutely take. And I know 2 years ago, I caught a lot of flack on the internet for this, for something that I hesitate to bring up because it was completely out of context. But when Jim Harbaugh was leaving for the NFL and before he left for the NFL, I was doing a live stream and someone asked me, do I think that Brian Kelly would be interested in the Patriots job as a guy from Boston and Belichick was out in New England? And I said, no, but I have heard that he would have interest in Michigan. And what I said was that if they offered the job, I believe he would take it. Now, I gave a 90-second qualifier where I said I had no idea if Harbaugh was leaving. I had no idea whatsoever if Michigan would have any interest in Brian Kelly, and I still don't know that. It is worth noting that Ward Manuel, the AD at Michigan, is a New Orleans guy, went to Brother Martin in New Orleans, and is the Michigan AD. So there is some connection there, and maybe they could have a conversation. I have no idea. None whatsoever, if the University of Michigan would have any interest in hiring Brian Kelly. Let me make that abundantly clear, okay? Are we all clear with what I'm saying? I'm not breaking news. I'm not reporting anything. I have no idea at all if anyone at the University of Michigan has any interest whatsoever in hiring Brian Kelly. What I know is his name is on that list of the betting odds. He's available. He is a stable head coach, and I understand that he didn't win at the clip at LSU where the expectation was, but he still won at LSU. I mean, he was fired with a winning record. So it wasn't like the bottom fell out. It just was a season that didn't meet expectations. And given what Michigan is embarking on right now, after 2 years of Sherrone Moore scandal, could they stabilize a little bit? That's a fair question. And it, of course, is notable because if Brian Kelly were to get that job, it would offset his LSU buyout, where LSU has agreed to pay him the full $54 million. But, of course, in good faith, he has to look for a new job. But if he gets the Michigan job, I don't think there's any doubt that his Michigan contract would offset the LSU buyout. Maybe they agree to a settlement of that buyout, or it goes to nothing. I don't know. It would probably be very similar to what Penn State and Jim Harbaugh did, agreeing to a lesser number because Harbaugh took the Virginia Tech job. Again, I think this is a long shot. I don't think the odds are great of this happening, but it is something that's worth watching as Michigan embarks on their coaching search to see if they maybe don't try to find a stabilizing force, a guy that's familiar with the Midwest and certainly has a great love and respect for the University of Michigan. It's just something to put on your radar. The other thing that better be on your radar, and I don't know if any of this is going to happen, even if it's a 2% chance of it happening, but it's the Bryce Underwood piece. And we'll talk about that next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, the momentum flips after a turnover, and FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and so much more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. The game moves fast, and so can you with FanDuel. So I think the reaction that I had initially is the reaction many of you probably had when you first saw the news that Sherrone Moore was fired at Michigan. Does that mean Bryce Underwood's going to go in the transfer portal? A quick reminder, okay? So Bryce Underwood was we all know this, but for maybe the one or two of you who don't recall, Bryce Underwood, quarterback out of the state of Michigan, the number one prospect in the country for the class of 2025. He was committed to LSU for a solid year. And a week before the early signing period a year ago, Bryce Underwood abruptly flipped his commitment to the University of Michigan after passing on overtures for a year. And we all know the story. Larry Ellison, the founder CEO of Oracle, paid Bryce Underwood a very healthy NIL deal to and I know that because I know how the negotiations went from the LSU side of it and the communication with Bryce Underwood. So I broke that story, the $12 million a year ago. And so I know how that contract with Michigan was structured. So I want to tell you a little bit about that. There might be this thought that Bryce Underwood would never leave because they paid him $12 million. That's not exactly true. The $12 million was over 4 years. So part of LSU's pitch a year ago was, hey, look, you're probably not going to spend 4 years in college. So the $12 million is really $9 million if you stay for 3 years. Well, what LSU was offering was a 3-year deal at $1.5 million thereabouts per, which was going to put LSU about $1.5 million behind what Michigan would have been paying on a per year basis. But after 3 years, certainly if he's off to the NFL, the difference would have been marginal at that point. So when you consider taxes and agent fees and everything that would have gone into it. So anyway, that's the pitch that LSU was sort of making. So all that to say, Bryce Underwood, as I understand it a year ago, his contract was a year-to-year deal. It wasn't, here's $12 million, now you can't leave. If you do, you got to pay it back. It was a year-to-year contract where he'd make $3 million per year. So I don't think the financial component of this is something that would be prohibitive. What I do think could be prohibitive is whether or not he would actually leave. So remember, Joe Sloan was the one who had the great relationship with Bryce Underwood. Brian Kelly was the head coach, of course, but it was Sloan who was the guy that I used to joke basically took up a second residence in Michigan because he was up there to see Underwood. Underwood came to Baton Rouge 9 times on his own dime, thereabouts to see Baton Rouge and to see LSU's campus. So I don't know from Bryce Underwood's standpoint if that would still hold without Joe Sloan here. Of course, Joe Sloan is now the offensive coordinator at Kentucky. The other part of it is, would you want Bryce Underwood after the rookie season that he just had? Now, I know that Bryce Underwood was a 5-star and the number 1 quarterback in the country. And is it really fair to try to judge a freshman quarterback in the Big Ten playing for the first time? But he threw 9 touchdowns and 6 interceptions as a freshman. It wasn't awesome for Bryce Underwood this year. Again, I try to be respectful of the fact that this is a dude that's 6'4", 230, as athletically gifted a quarterback, as we've seen maybe since Trevor Lawrence. I mean, one of those types of players. He did run for 323 yards and 5 touchdowns this year. So he has some of that dual threat ability to him. But would Bryce Underwood even leave Michigan? If he did, would he consider LSU because Joe Sloan's not here? And even if he did, would it make sense for Lane Kiffin's offense? Listen, I think when you have a guy that's that physically gifted, you absolutely take him. And it's undeniable, if you caught our previous episode, that LSU is going to be in the transfer portal for quarterbacks. Or maybe one, if you can land a guy like Bryce Underwood, something we're going to follow. By the way, Dave Portnoy of Barstool tweeted, "How much did LSU pay Lane Kiffin? Let's double it. He'd leave, reunite him with Bryce Underwood." Lane Kiffin quote tweeted and said, "Instead, at Stool Presidente, you hashtag come to the boot. Together, we can't be beat." So Lane Kiffin sort of emphatically there saying, not leaving LSU for Michigan. In fact, Portnoy, why don't you come down to Baton Rouge? Never boring with Lane Kiffin, that's for certain. And LSU is going to be super active in the transfer portal when it opens up. And it's going to be worth watching the Michigan players with Sherrone Moore out. They could jump into the transfer portal now, and that could be a target for LSU and their new coach, the self-appointed portal king, Lane Kiffin. You better believe we'll be talking about it right here on Locked on LSU. So please subscribe on podcast or on YouTube. Until next time, it's Locked on LSU, your team every day.